I don't know if this one counts as a horror movie. It feels like it should. We need to talk about Kevin. So this is a commissioned review. And I suppose I'll deal with the elephant in the room first. I am not going to be addressing anything about Ezra Miller's issues as a person and with the law that they have had since this came out. If I refer to Ezra Miller as an actor, I will use they, them pronouns because they are non-binary. That does not mean that I actually respect them as a person or think well of them. You don't need to respect someone to give them a few basic hints of humanity. I've criticized them thoroughly. There's a video to see me doing that. But when I refer to the character of Kevin, I will say he, as the character, is not non-binary, even though the actor is. So, setting all of that aside, and yes, that does also mean I'm not going to use this as a backdoor way to try and diagnose Ezra Miller or be anything like, oh, well, they were so good at playing this part because obviously there was something wrong with them. Like that, I hate armchair psychology, and I won't have it, and I won't do it. Regardless, this is a movie from 2011. It's based on a book, and it focuses primarily on Tilda Swinton's character of Ava. Ava is a mother of two, her elder child being the titular Kevin. This is a story about a mother of a young man who committed mass violence. That's not really a spoiler. While the specifics don't fully fall into place until the tail end, the idea that Kevin did something horrible is introduced very early into the movie. So this whole thing is structured non-linearly. It cuts between Ava's current living situation where she's living in this rundown house. Her neighbors hate her. Most of the town seems to hate her. She's struggling to find work. They clearly blame her and hold her to some degree responsible for what it was her son did. And she seems to be willing to put up with it because it keeps her close to him, and he is currently in jail. And it cuts between that and earlier points of her raising Kevin, including when he was a baby, when he was a young child, and then when he was a teenager, using a couple of different actors across that, all of whom, at least visually, incredibly well cast, looked consistently like the same person. Pretty impressive, actually. So, this thing is heavy. It's a lot. And it's one of those things that I can look at, and I can watch, and I can say, that was a good piece of art. It accomplished what it set out to do, I believe, and it went about it in a thoughtful manner. And it could have been very crass, and it wasn't. This is a well-done piece of work that I never want to see again. It's one of those movies where, like, if someone told me they watched it more than once, I might not ask it out loud, but mentally my immediate thought is, why? I mean, unless you're studying the editing and the filming techniques or the acting or something like that, just like, oh, for fun. Huh? Fun? No. I do think that as far as a movie about a young man who commits horrific violence goes, I think that it is very wise to tell the story so much from Ava's perspective and to focus much more on her. I would say that about as well as it can be done, this does a decent job of avoiding the standard pitfall of these kinds of stories, which is it's very hard to tell a story of this kind of person without in some way making them look cool to a kind of person who shouldn't be looking to anybody like this as a role model. Like it's the Fight Club trap is the sort of classic way that textually, that movie is pulling apart and examining toxic masculinity. Unfortunately, because part of its story is showing the appeal of toxic masculinity, its toxic masculine character ends up being really appealing to a lot of people, even though it shouldn't. It's one of those things that's just very difficult to tackle. And I would say this does a pretty good job, largely because Kevin is a secondary thing. Like, we see him and we get hints of him, but he's never cool. He's odd and awkward and unsettling. But he's also not completely dehumanized either, because that also could theoretically make him seem cool. Like, oh, he's like a dangerous machine. Oh, he doesn't feel like... It's not that straightforward. It's not that simple, especially with kind of what happens towards the very end. And I think when you're going to tell a story like this, you have a certain amount of responsibility. And I think this movie took that responsibility seriously. And it's juggling a lot of questions and deliberately not answering them, which is a valid thing to do, especially in a piece of art, because it absolutely is bringing up and confronting the questions of, was Kevin always like this? Did Ava's parenting make it worse? Because it's pretty unflinching with the fact that she was not a great mother to him. Now, depending on how much you believe is this from Ava's perspective in the sense of her possibly being an unreliable narrator, it's my understanding that's a little more of a case in the book. I can't vouch for that, though. But, you know, was he always this bad, or is that how she saw him because she couldn't relate to him? Possibly. But even if he was, she still wasn't a great mother. It was very clear she wasn't fit for the strains of motherhood at the time that she had him. She seems to be doing better when she has her second kid, but she's not a great mother to him. Did that cause the problem? Did it make it worse? Could she have done something to prevent this? If she had a better bond with him, could she at least have helped him keep it together enough that he could have gotten out of high school and into the real world and realized, oh, no, God, that stuff that I thought was horrible thoughts. Glad I moved on from that. Glad I'm now in a world of consequences, real world consequences. And it's not all stuff I can intellectualize in my head and come to a horrifying conclusion about. The film brings these questions up. How much of it was he was just like this? How much of it was she wasn't there for him and she couldn't manage him? How much of it is it that he was unmanageable? How responsible is she for the monster that Kevin is? And even if it's not how she raised him, is he a colder version of her? She has a certain amount of detachment. She has a certain amount of judgment of people. In some ways, he feels like those aspects of her ramped up. So even if he was born this way, is that still maybe kind of her fault? These are things brought up, but not properly answered. And I think for a movie like this, it's better to not try and answer those questions, because there are no clean answers in the real world version of these. Anyone caught up in any event like this is going to wonder forever, could I have done something to prevent this? Was there something that I did that pushed this person towards what they did? Could I have stopped it? Could I have delayed it? Could I have helped? Is it my fault? And most of the time, those questions don't have clean answers. And I think it's fitting that in the movie it doesn't either. There's a good sense of palpable dread in this. Tilda Swinton does an amazing job as Ava, because she has to do a lot. She has to play a woman who is not especially likable at a lot of points in this movie, but also play her in a way that you still have some connection with her despite these things. And Ezra Miller has to play a character that, for most of the time, at least when he's playing the part, is just cold and detached. But then towards the very end, they give a little bit of vulnerability that sort of shows that there's something else underneath the monster. Something that's maybe scared. Does that forgive what he did? No. Hell no. Absolutely not. But again, muddying the waters. It can be difficult to do something like this because oftentimes when films sort of approach these things with like there's no clean answers, it just comes across as the film refusing to take a stance. Except that in this case, it feels like the stance is that there are no clean answers. That's not dodging the point. That is the point. And it's a lot. There were bits of this I had to fast forward through. I had to watch this in a couple of sessions. I couldn't just sit down and watch the whole thing front to back. I couldn't take this in 2 hours. If I tried to see this in the movie theater, I probably would have been depressed for a week because I would have had to sit there and watch the whole thing in one go. This movie is very good. I'm not going to recommend it unless you want that kind of emotionally, philosophically harrowing experience. Because that's what this is. And if that's what you're looking for, you'll find it here. It's not an experience that I think anyone should go into lightly. It's a lot. This movie's a lot. And it's a lot in a very tight and very controlled way, in a very deliberate way. It's a good movie that I will be happy to never watch again. We need to talk about Kevin. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon was how I was commissioned to review this particular piece. But there's other things that you can do to support me there as well. Don't worry too much about it, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can come on back next time you need a break. Time to thank some Patreon backers, and in the spirit of October, I'd like to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Goddess Alita, Turok, The Thing That Goes Doink in the Anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernobulax the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, and Rosalind Bennett. Thank you for your assistance. I don't know, I might try theming the shoutouts in the future. I don't know, we'll see. Thank you.